Hey, Andrina, can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
My webcam, okay, the light's on, but I won't say nobody's home, but I'm really here. So
Okay, well, thanks for like,
I've been trying
do
to
you,
diagnose this, but I can't get this sucker to, other than shine a light in my face, it's not picking up. So I'm here.
well, thank you for letting us know, Tracy, not a problem.
Okay, if maybe it'll come on, you never know. I might get lucky. Actually, I'm probably going to I'm going to probably turn the computer off and on, see if that helps. So I'll be back in a minute.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
See you in
Bye.
a little bit.
How is everyone?
Good.
How are you doing, Jen?
Well, I'm sad to look at you, but I'm sure you'll be doing great very soon. I'm sad that you're leaving.
Me too. I am sad to be leaving as well. So,
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry about that. I'm just trying to get caught up. It's been one of those days.
you're good.
I give up. I don't know. I maybe I'll come on and you'll see me partway through this, but I'm sorry, guys. I can't get my video to work right now.
You're good, Tracy. Thanks for trying. It's the effort that counts.
Send us a picture and we'll just put it up there. Pretend.
Let's see, who all's in the meeting? Do we have a quorum? Let's see, I have Jordan, Phillip, Brian Robinson. I think I need 4. And we got,
PJ, if you like, we can ask Stephanie to call roll call for the record. Would you like us to do that?
I would love that. Thank you.
Miss Stephanie?
Yes, ma'am. Okay, PJ Stevens,
Here.
Tracy Duback.
Here.
Dubcac, I'm sorry.
Big chalkboard. Here.
Jen Henderson,
Here.
Brian Ortega, Brian Robinson,
Here.
Philip Wonky,
Here.
and Jordan Maddox.
Here.
Awesome.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steph. We have a quorum. And so I will open this meeting of the Unified Development Code Advisory Committee. It's May 12th. It is 3:33 p.m. Welcome, welcome. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. And anyway, I will just let's see, do we have any guests in the audience? I can't tell.
PJ, this is Amy Payne, and I'm on here right
Oh,
now.
Hi, Amy. Thank you for showing up.
Yes.
Speaking up. All right. Anybody else that's not with the city or with the commission?
And no, PJ, it looks like Amy is the only member of the public that we have with
All right.
us so far, at
All
least up until right now.
All right, thank you. Great. Okay, so let's just dive right in here. Regular session, discuss how the UDC Advisory Committee virtual conference will be conducted to include options for public comments and how the public may address the commission. Item
All right,
A.
well, it's just a very brief recap and a quick reminder just to everybody that if you are not speaking, please mute your microphones. This way we can avoid any echoing and background noises and make sure that we're able to hear everybody clearly. Also, if you run into any technical difficulties, like if your call happens to fall or you're having issues getting logged in, please just call out our numbers. You can call my office at 512-931-7686 just to let us know, so then that way we can make sure to either pause the meeting if we need to, or at least be able to provide you some assistance when being able to get on the call or get back to the meeting, I should say. Also, I know in particular, since we do have Amy with us, although she's very familiar with our process and everything, is just being mindful about that. We'll go ahead and present and have discussion on the items. And then, the chair will definitely open it up for public discussion, at which time any member of the public that wishes to speak on the item can do so. And so with that, that's all I have, and I'll turn it over back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, I think that moves us to basically the legislative regular agenda, item C. Consideration possible action to approve the minutes of March 10th and April 14th, 2021 regular meetings of the UDC Advisory Committee. Has everybody gotten their minutes and looked at them?
I did, and I'll make a motion to approve.
I have one comment on, I assume you're talking about both of them, Jen? Okay, I have actually one comment on, let's see, March 10th. Underneath item D, you got the motion to recommend the city council to approve the red line, blah, blah, blah. I don't know whose motion that is. It doesn't state who motioned it. It said Robinson seconded. But anyway,
I can make that update. Thank you.
yeah, I figure you can get it from the notes. And I think I had one. No, that was it. So I guess I probably should have seconded that first before I made my comment. So I'll second it and then I'll make my comment after that. Excuse me. Anybody else? All in favor of the motion with the notes just mentioned, say aye.
I,
I,
Right, motion carries. All right. Okay. Item D, discussion and possible direction on a proposed text amendment to the UDC advisory, no, I'm sorry, to the Unified Development Code relating to the tree preservation and landscape standards, specifically as it pertains to tree mitigation requirements. UDC General Amendment number 20-03. I'm not sure who's making the presentation, but you have the floor.
Well, I'll go ahead and get us started and just introduce the item. So Chair, as you mentioned, this particular item is a follow-up discussion to what we started talking about at the last month meeting back in April, related to two new items that the City Council had requested us for to be able to look into and consider as part of the amendments that we're working on the tree preservation and landscaping ordinance. And so with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ethan Harwell and Steve McEwen, who are going to be leading us in this presentation.
Awesome. So if y'all remember at your last meeting, we covered two new issues that have been brought up by the City Council for us to address. When we presented to them all the other work we did last fall on those cleanup items to the tree preservation ordinance and the landscape ordinance. Last month, we really got to talk through those issues with y'all, brainstorm and get an idea of where y'all would like to see us go with our proposed solutions. And so what we have today are the work we've done since then on really crafting our proposed solution to you guys. And so today we seek your feedback on those solutions and so that we can bring back some red lines to the ordinance for you next month for your review and approval then. So the first item that we talked about last month was much more simple than the second one, but it related to the ability to use, to the ability to reduce the size of a credit tree. To reduce the size of a credit tree. And I don't think I'm on the right slide here. Maybe it's the right one. No, that's it. So currently in our code, credit trees are any tree between 6 and 12 inches. These come into play whenever you're considering tree mitigation. If you leave these existing trees between 6 to 12 inches, you can receive credit for them. Up to 75% of your required mitigation on non-residential sites, this only applies to non-residential sites, can be credited for, 75% of the mitigation for protected trees can be accounted for with these credit trees. We did some research into other cities in our area and found that our standard of 6 to 11 inches is somewhat the standard because not many other places offer a credit tree option. City of Cedar Park allows you to consider trees between 6 and 9 inches as credit trees, and the City of Round Rock lets you consider trees between 3 and 7 inches as credit trees. So last month we talked through a few different scenarios, and the one that we seemed to really latch onto was just to make it an option, give the flexibility for developers to survey those smaller trees if they want, but do set a bottom threshold. We don't need to necessarily be giving credit for 1 or 2 inch trees that somebody happened to survey. So our proposal for you guys today is to allow credit trees smaller than 6 inches. as measured at the standard DBH height, 4.5 feet above the ground, if these 4 conditions are met. They have to be in areas that are undisturbed. They have to be trees in good health. In other words, they have to be trees worth saving. During construction, that critical root zone on these trees, especially these small trees, which is very sensitive, shouldn't be disturbed. And credit should be given at a 0.5 to 1 ratio for those inches. So we feel like this is a pretty good solution. Giving the option, but not making it necessarily a requirement. Just giving folks that flexibility to count these trees, especially if you have a significant stand of them. But we welcome your feedback or comments.
I got one question. On A, when it says located in undisturbed areas, does that go beyond the critical root zone in your mind on this one?
Steve?
No, Phil, the intent of this is to just make sure that it coincides with C, where the full critical root zone isn't going to be impacted. Chances are a lot of these smaller trees will be located amongst groupings. So, the idea was to just really protect the entire, that entire area, including the full critical root zone.
Similar question to that, Steve, when in B, when it says within or near a group of trees, is that dimensionally specific, or is it just is it kind of close to a group, or how do you see that one?
So that one's again getting back to where these smaller trees are generally going to be located. It's likely that they're going to be located within groupings of either larger trees or just groupings of those smaller trees in general. So, it doesn't have to be directly underneath or surrounded by bigger trees, but if it's close to a large grouping of protected size trees, something like that, that's kind of the intent, that way we're not really spacing these trees out all over the site. They're just really kind of collected in an area that can be safely protected and not disturbed.
And clarification on that does this have to be a species that is a shade tree, or can this be any tree that is on the approved planting list?
This would end up being the shade tree category.
Okay.
So it's not going to include ornamental trees.
Okay. Shade tree only. Okay. Got it.
Do we need to define that, or is that already defined by the word tree at the top?
PJ, I think we'll need to be very clear that it should be a shade tree. Andrina is taking note of that. I think I'm supposed to have her notes pulled up on the screen so you can also see them, but I don't. So,
Yeah, I'm agreeing with Jordan. I think the word near is going to be where your biggest discussions are with. I don't know how you want to mess with that, but y'all deal with that more than I do, so I'm deferring to y'all's expertise.
Yeah, I guess the comment on that would be, understanding. So you get credit for a 3-inch tree or larger, but it has to be near another 3-inch tree or another mitigation tree. I guess that just really needs to be clarified, and if that's a critical thing. Kind of related to that, wasn't one of the issues that you have a 3-inch tree under a 6 or 8-inch tree for mitigation, and so it's going to have a hard time getting getting sunlight and things like that. That was one of the concerns I think you mentioned before, right, Steve?
Yeah. I kind of foresee this smaller size really taking into consideration a number of elements and like where it's located, if it's, like you just said, if it's located under a number of large trees. You know, the near kind of plays off of what we see, or what I see a lot of times when a tree is being protected and then there are other smaller trees close by, but you know, the developer or contractors trying to remove those trees because they need to put something, you know, whether it's sidewalk or utilities or something like that. So near is kind of a a blanket and hard to nail down use to define, but that's kind of the intent of it. So if it's near the large, or a large grouping or larger trees, then really the intent is that, you know, you're not just saving that larger trees half critical root zone, but you're also having to account for these smaller trees that you're trying to get credit for by saving their full critical root zone. So that needs to be taken into consideration. It doesn't mean that if a site only has, like, you know, 1 4-inch tree located out on its own, that it wouldn't be accepted. It's just, you know, we'll probably end up defining it more when we actually develop the red lines, but that was the main concern for B, for the statement of B.
Yeah, to me, it almost seems like some of this is just guideline stuff rather than part of what we would consider the code, just because it's hard to define. I think we probably ought to focus, or at least my recommendation would be to focus on, can we use 3 to 6 inch trees? Yes. Do they need to be in good health? Yes. And then don't mess with the critical root zone, the entire thing, because they're small. I understand that. And then the only other discussion item would be, I think having the 1/2 to 1 ratio addresses some of the concerns of whether it's near groups or that kind of thing. It kind of, I don't know what the cost is going to be compared to survey versus getting that kind of credit. That'll have to be determined by the developer, I guess. But that would be those are my focus points, I think. Just be real clear about, yes, you can count them, can't disturb the root zone, and you get half credit for each inch. That makes sense to me.
Okay.
We did, Philip, you reminded me that last fall we did define a lot of terms related to trees as part of the cleanup items. One of the terms we defined was a tree stand. We talked about being a cluster of trees that have similar characteristics, size, age, health. So I think we'll make sure and use that term and reflect that definition here in the red lines.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments? I guess not. Let's move on.
Awesome. Well, the next item we discussed, we referred to as item 11.2, which was the idea of allowing on-site mitigation credit for on-site replacement trees in residential street yards. So we'll just kind of briefly review what we talked about last week. First thing we talked about last week was the just kind of state law requirements, generally around tree preservation. There are some considerations to take into account when we're regulating trees on residential lots that we don't have to take into account on commercial lots. So state law does not allow us to regulate tree removal, excuse me, when a tree is less than 10 inches on a residential lot. We are required, the 2 big points, can't regulate tree removal on trees less than 10 inches. We cannot prohibit removal of a tree that poses some sort of threat to people or property. And then of course we have to allow some way for a developer to receive credit for on-site plantings if we're going to charge a mitigation fee. we cannot remove a tree and tell a developer that no, you cannot replace that tree on the property. That has to be an option. In our code, our tree preservation ordinance was established in 2007. So any single family lot here in the city that is platted before 2007 is exempt from our ordinance. Otherwise, all new residential development has to mitigate for heritage trees only. So those are those trees of those specific species, 26 inches and up. Correct. In addition to that, on single family lots, we do have landscape requirements, which are separate from our tree preservation requirements. And those requirements essentially say that for every 50 feet of frontage you have on a lot, 1 shade tree is required. So if you have a 50-foot lot in the middle of a block, 1 shade tree is required. Let's say you have a 50 by 150 foot lot on a corner, you would be required 1 shade tree for the 50 in the front and 3 for the 50 feet of frontage on the side. Our minimum planting sizes do come into play here, where that tree has to be at least 3 inches in diameter and have at least 1 bubbler installed to provide irrigation. So when we did our comparison view of other cities, all cities require some form of on-site replacement as well as fee in lieu. One of the things that we were asked to do at our last meeting was really make sure we had a complete picture of what other cities in the area were requiring. So I will ask Steve to give kind of an overview of what we learned as we called different places.
Sure.
Feedback.
So we reached out to Austin, Cedar Park, Leander, San Marcos, Pflugerville, and Kyle. What we came back and have listed here is the cities that, or each city and how they view on-site plantings in a residential lot, how it's enforced, whether or not credit is provided, whether or not it's counted towards landscape requirements, and then how it's inspected at the end or during the process of review. So Austin does allow for on-site plantings. They generally tie this to a maintenance agreement and CCNRs or the CCRs with the approval process. And then it does count towards their street yard requirements for their residential, and the inspection process is taken care of during the final home inspection on a subdivision. Cedar Park does allow for on-site plantings as well within a residential lot. Their requirements, however, everything has to stand on its own. And by that means the plantings that are required for the residential street yard are separate from any additional plantings that are trying to be used to offset mitigation. So if a 3-inch tree, I think in their case, 2 3-inch trees are required per yard. So then a developer would need to plant more than those 2 trees or plant larger calipers of those 2 trees to get credit towards mitigation. Like I said, it does not count towards their actual landscape requirements. Those do have to be fulfilled separately. And then their inspection process takes place as well at the end during a final inspection. Leander does not allow for on-site plantings to count towards mitigation at all, just across the board. They had in the past, but recently they changed their policy on that. Or I think in the past they had for specific projects, but across the board and going forward, they will not. San Marcos They don't allow for on-site plantings on the residential lots, but they do allow for plantings in locations such as like your landscape strip, your parkway strip between sidewalk and road. They do have, I believe they have, yeah. So their inspection process takes place at the acceptance of the improvements by the city. So after that, there's no final inspection as there is with Austin and Cedar Park. Pflugerville does allow for it. It is above and beyond the minimum requirements of their residential street yard plantings. It does not, it doesn't count, like I just said. And then the inspection process is also at the final stage during the CO. Kyle did not actually address this in their code. However, they allow, similar to us currently, to Georgetown, they allow for plantings within their amenity areas. And then anything that's planted, again, is in addition to the minimum landscape requirements. And this is all inspected during the CO process as well. We have prepared or put together a couple of examples of projects as that was requested to kind of get a better understanding of what it would look like for what the project did and what it would have seen had it gone through the street yard planting process. On a 96 lot subdivision, roughly 32 acres in this case, there were 32 trees removed. The applicant decided to do a fee in lieu because they had no availability to plant on site. And in order to, if they did have the ability to plant within residential street yards, the requirement would have been a total of 96 inches to be planted. And at a general cost estimate of $350 an inch, that would have seen a total amount of $33,600. The next subdivision is a 65 lot subdivision, roughly a 15 acre overall site. It had 26 inches. The applicant was able to do some planting on site. They also satisfied through aeration, fertilization, and ultimately the rest was handled via fee in lieu. They planted roughly 9 trees. And then if they had planted on residential street yards, it would have required a total of 78 inches, which pretty much breaks down to 26 trees. And then they would have seen a price point of $27,300. The next lot is, or the next subdivision is also a 96 lot subdivision, roughly 20 acres. This site had roughly 364 inches removed. The mitigation types fulfilled on this was a combination of fee in lieu, aeration and fertilization, and some on-site plantings. They did have the ability to plant. Most of the plantings, just to be clear, most of the plantings for these projects have taken place in common areas, whether it's ponds, medians, just open space lots, things like that. That's where they're currently taking place. The required number of inches for this project would have been just over 1,000 inches. And at the cost of planting a tree, that would have run roughly $382,725 to replace entirely with street yard trees. The next subdivision is a 254 lot subdivision. In this case, there weren't a whole lot of trees on the site to begin with, and they were fortunately located in one specific location on site. So they dedicated that area as an open space lot and was able to save them all. So there was no mitigation or, requirement to do calculations on this one. The next subdivision is a 151 lot subdivision on roughly 59 acres. There was right around 425 inches removed. The types of mitigation was just fee in lieu. The ability to plant on site, there was an ability to plant on site. There were no plantings provided, and the total inches required for this project would have been 1275, and that would have run right around a $446,250 cost for those plantings.
Yes. So as we worked through these issues, as we researched other cities, as we thought about our own code, and as we kind of tested this and applied this to different subdivisions, we found there was going to be kind of a menu of options to talk about. At our last meeting, we talked through these different options. We talked about a lot of things. What might fair credit be? What might maintenance look like? What's appropriate? Do we cram a whole bunch of trees on one lot and see what lives, or do we just try to plan for these trees to run their course naturally? But what we found is that any option we could come up with kind of centered around three questions. The first question being, how should credit be determined? Generally, in our ordinance, things are typically done by inch. However, it would also work to set a certain amount per tree. When thinking about how much credit we want to be able to give for a tree, we of course want to think about things like maintenance, and then kind of this idea of rough proportionality, right? If we are removing a heritage tree, it's a 26-inch tree with a large canopy, how much is planting one tree with all of the uncertainties around that, really mitigating for that use. So there are some options where if you feel it really mitigates for that, you can consider a higher ratio, a 2 to 1 ratio, a 3 to 1 ratio. If you feel it's adequate, you might consider a 1 to 1 ratio. Or if you don't feel like it's adequate at all, you could consider a 0.5 to 1 ratio, right? Getting half credit for what you plant. If you're considering a set amount per tree, that idea kind of levels out considerations, because maybe you just apply a certain inches of credit per tree that gets planted, no matter the size or location, other considerations. The second question we found that we had to ask was how much credit should be given per lot. This brings up some questions such as how many trees are appropriate to be on one lot? How close together should the trees be? What kind of situations and spacing do trees do best? This also gives a question of how do you scale this requirement to fit with different size lots? There are many places in the city where we have 40, 45-foot lots, but we are also a city with many beautiful large lot homes. So theoretically, if you have small lots, you have to move more trees because you're increasing your buildable area. But if you have large lots, you have more flexibility to situate improvements around existing trees. But that also means you have more space to plant here as well, because you actually have some space to move around the lot and plant. The next question here might be similar to the first question. How might this be equitably be applied? Is this something that will really benefit, the west side of town, more than the southeast side of town, that kind of a thing. So generally 2 options here. No limit, but we might recommend that you consider a spacing option, right? Again, the other, consideration I think is, cramming as many trees on one lot and see what lives. But if you want to a regulation to be appropriate, you might consider that standard 30-foot on center spacing. Gives trees room to grow and their canopies to mature and not intersect. So you can just plant as many as you can get on there, as long as you meet that requirement. Or you may want to just say as many trees as you can, but we're going to cap you out at 3 inches of credit, cap you out at 6 inches of credit. And that kind of also answers the same question, same issue of, well, do we want to just cram trees on a lot? The third question that we asked ourselves as we prepared our option for you was how much of the mitigation for the subdivision should an on-site planting option in residential street yards accommodate for? Again, the question of rough proportionality came up here. Again, the question of maintenance came up here. And our city attorney has advised us that they would not be in support of any mention of CC&Rs or anything like that, that the city is specifically prohibited from advising or enforcing on. We also have to remember that this is not the only mitigation option. There are still 4 other mitigation options that will be available. Planting common areas, aeration, fertilization, off-site plantings, and the fee in lieu option lastly. We want to make sure that at the end of the day, when the subdivision is all said and done, are we ending up with a subdivision that is better off because of this rule? Do we either get more trees? Do we have the option for future canopy in the future? Are we ending up with healthier trees, trees that are more accessible to the public and within the public realm for folks to enjoy? Or are they hidden off and dead and sickly trees? Other thing to consider is that this is establishing a new standard, right? We call our regulation standards simply because that's what they are. They're a standard. It's meant to be applied across the board, and then we consider deviations from here, right? This is our starting place. So again, kind of a no limit option is available. No limit, cramming them up on the lots as much as you can, or no limit, plant as much as you can, but meet spacing requirements. Right. So theoretically, with that option, somebody could satisfy 100% of their mitigation through on-site plantings and street yards. The second option, considering street yard plantings just as a total percentage of the mitigation, really reflects the fact that this is just one option a developer has to satisfy mitigation. This is something we already do for our aeration and fertilization option. Right? There's only so much aerating and so much fertilizing you can do on the trees that are left, right? And so we actually say that 30% of your mitigation, only 30% of your mitigation can be satisfied by aeration fertilization. So here we've taken, in this example, we've taken that 30% limit. You could choose a different number if you want. That's just something we already do. So as we thought about these questions, put it all together, we got feedback from all of our city staff. We talked to building inspections, we talked to utilities, we talked to public works, the city manager's office, parks and recreation, our urban forester. And out of those discussions came this 5-point recommendation that we would like y'all to consider today. We would propose to allow the plantings in the street yards with just a few conditions. Number one, of course, the tree has to meet our minimum planting standard. If you're planting less than a 3-inch tree, was it really worth planting necessarily? We propose that we cap credit at 3 inches per lot. We do feel like this is fair and allows some elasticity in application of the standard across lots of different sizes. We do propose that this could only count for up to 30% of the total mitigation credit. We feel like this is reflective of the standard we already have for aeration and fertilization. And plus, when you take it into account with the other options that are still available, planting common areas, fee in lieu, the planting offsite, aeration, and aeration and fertilization, that fits nicely within those mitigation options folks are allowed to consider. Even if you just did plantings in street yards and aeration, you're already at 60% of your mitigation there. We do propose that this would have to be above and beyond landscaping requirements. So if you have a lot where one shade tree is required, 1 3-inch shade tree is required, and you plant another 3-inch shade tree required, that second tree that's above and beyond could be the tree you get credit for, or even perhaps if you wanted to plant a 6-inch tree instead of 1 3-inch tree, and just have your 3 inches built in there, that you could receive credit for those extra inches planted. And then lastly, through our conversations with staff, with you guys last week, we do need a way to track these things and to review where these trees are going and to make sure that they are being planted the way that we planned for when we planned for the subdivision and established that first tree preservation plan. And so we do propose that this only be an option available to properties that are subject to a building permit requirement, a residential building permit requirement, excuse me. So this is any single family home within the city limits and most of your single family subdivisions in the ETJ. Most of your subdivisions in the ETJ that are on city wastewater have a development agreement with us that requires a building permit review. Really the only situations you find in the city, in the ETJ, where a building permit beyond just your typical plumbing permit to connect to city water is required are larger 1-lot subdivisions that were 1-lot plus subdivisions that were able to stay on septic. And just for that reason, we never see a building permit for them. So, excuse me, that was a lot. So we, this is our option here for you today, but we welcome questions, comments, feedback, that kind of thing.
Thank you, Ethan. Any comments from anybody? And Amy, I'll let you chime in a minute, but let's hear from the group first. Go ahead, Philip.
Thanks. Let's see, a couple things. I agree with the 3-inch minimum because that's the requirement for any mitigation trees. I'm not quite sure about B. I think one thing that I brought up last time, which makes some sense to me, and just a quick case in point, during the freeze, I about lost one of the trees in my front yard, and hopefully it'll make it, but it looks pretty bad right now. So that could be a situation where you lose one tree on a lot at any time. And so with that, my thought was to be able to give half credit for these trees above and beyond, because that way you kind of work in a 50% survival rate for all the trees that are planted. So that's a little deviation from this and may replace B if that's if everybody agrees with that kind of idea. I generally do agree with the 30% total. I think, like you said, it goes along with the code and it kind of limits that a little bit. I think a caveat for that also is, and I don't know that it's listed here, is that mitigation trees should probably be planted on common area first to the maximum allowable and then on residential lots. So that's something I feel that you have more control over the common areas. So if we require that as a first, and maybe this 30% kind of offsets that. So I guess we can talk a little bit about how those two work together. And so the rest of it, I pretty much agree with. It needs to be tracked with the residential permit and the current landscape requirements. This needs to be above and beyond. So those are my general comments.
I don't see, and is spacing an issue with what your proposed terms are, or are these just above and beyond that?
Steve?
Spacing is still a concern. That's kind of the reasoning behind like A, and as Ethan has mentioned, giving the ability to go to like a 6-inch and then counting those 3 additional inches, or however this ends up playing out. But yeah, spacing is still a requirement. The general spacing is 30 feet on center. That's going to pose a lot of probably a lot of issues for standard lots, just because with driveways and lot lines, you don't have the spacing unless you're on a deeper lot to where you could stack them, one behind each other or one slightly off centered. But in general, there's other things to consider that's in the ground. You've got all the utilities that run up to the house that you also have to avoid. So spacing is definitely has been in our mind the whole time while we've come up with this. So yeah, and that'll.
I've just got kind of 2 trains of thought. They both are opposed, I guess. But on one hand, I understand the spacing requirement, but it seems to me if you have this on a smaller lot subdivision, if you get real strict about spacing, it's going to just look like this cookie cutter subdivision where you just got everything exactly square and perfectly, 30 feet apart. And I mean, the charm of a neighborhood is not like that. You want some almost random trees locations. And I worry about it becoming almost kind of robotic looking, or whatever the word is, but it'd just be very, I don't know, that's just a comment. I'm not saying one way or another, just as a thought more than anything.
I agree with that, PJ. To some extent, most of the trees that I see around neighborhoods like I'm in are roughly 15 foot apart when they plant 2 trees in a front yard.
I have a question about D. The landscape requirements currently are hinged on the size of that lot, correct?
Yes.
It's a 1 tree for a smaller lot, and you get a little bit bigger, and it's a 2 tree requirement. Is that correct?
It's based on the linear square footage of your lot. So
okay.
Every 50 feet, a tree is required.
Every 50 feet, okay. I think what I'm struggling with is this much of a benefit if it will not count at all towards meeting landscape requirements? Because what most of the lots that we're seeing out there are small lots. They're not going to have a whole lot of trees that can be planted. And if they've got to do one for landscaping and this is above and beyond at 30%, are they really going to be able to squeeze these trees into lots that are being platted right now?
Jordan, one thing we talked about at staff level is maybe just allowing flexibility on the lot, right? We feel a tree will be most beneficial in a backyard. And maybe we don't just have to limit to street yards. That is something we can consider as well.
Yeah, I think exactly what PJ and Philip were talking about, just trying to think of how these trees are going to position in, and with the size of lots that we're seeing, is it even possible to go above and beyond that landscape tree? Maybe the backyard does allow that, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I think last time we also heard, and Amy, you can clarify when she talks about it, but in one respect, at least from their perspective, that they're going to plant 2 trees in the front yard anyway, and they would like to get some credit for it. So I don't know if it's as much a fact of fitting it in, or just that, they're going to follow their standard practice and plant them normally and then get some credit for it. So I think in most cases, 2 trees on a lot, even if it's a small 50 or 45 foot lot, typically can fit, but they're not going to be 30 foot apart.
Well, we have to be careful. I mean, I'm sure Amy and them, build a beautiful subdivision, but we're here to look at kind of unintended consequences and groups that we don't know about. So we don't know what's going to get built by other people. So just another thought, but unless you have any comments, I'd love to hear Amy's input on this. Amy, if you're willing to contribute, you have the floor.
Thank you, PJ. I wish I could figure out how to get my video on because I had intended to do that. And I also don't know how to share my screen on Zoom. We do most of our meetings on a team meeting. So I don't know. The PDF that I sent, or Andrina, maybe if you have it where you could share it, where I could just go through it briefly.
I can pull it up, Amy.
Okay, thanks, Ethan. And I just wanted to say thank you so much to staff for looking into this and all of the hard work that y'all have done. Obviously, whenever you create a new requirement, y'all know best. You're trying to look at how it's going to be applied across the board to everybody. And that's no easy task. So I applaud you guys for doing that. And we just kind of know our little piece of the pie on our project. So I'll just give you my 2 cents but I thank you guys for listening and considering this. And I'll be brief. I won't go over 5 minutes because I know y'all have already heard a whole lot about this. So
the tables first.
Yes, the tables would be great. So one thing that Andrina had called and talked to me about was that we basically just did a case study for the 3 sections that we currently are building out there right now at Parkside on the River. One section is 151 lots. It appeared in the slide that Ethan presented. One is for 122 lots and one is for 61 lots. So they vary in size. Our tree rules are different in our development agreement than the current code. And so this first table, just very briefly, I don't know if you can read it, but on the right-hand side, there is in bold, it says mitigation inches 3-to-1 ratio. And there's a 464 number for phase 1A, 3,651 inches for 2-1, and 1,575 inches for 2-2. And each of these projects are very heavily treed. Some have, if you look at the top, which is the first one, which is 1A, there's a note that it says it's heavily treed site with numerous protected and credit trees and moderate number of heritage trees. So our credit tree rule for this project is different, where the code allows for 6 inches to 11 inches for credit trees. Our credit trees have to be larger for 18 to 25 inches. And then 2-1, it's a heavily treed site. It's got a fair number of protected credit trees, but it's got numerous heritage trees. That's why that mitigation ratio on 2-1 is so high, because there are so many large trees on this site. And then on 2-2, it's a heavily treed site with very few credit trees and numerous heritage trees. So for the size of the project, it has quite a bit of mitigation inches, 1,575 inches. And then off to the right, there are these options that I put in here that if you assumed you planted a 3-inch tree, a 4-inch, or a 6-inch, and how many trees you'd have to plant. Just to point out, phase 2-1, we'd have to plant 1,217 3-inch trees. And on phase 2-1, we'd have to plant 525 inches trees. So it's pretty considerable amount of trees. Ethan, if you could go to the next slide or the next part of the PDF, that'd be great. So the difference here is that the other caveat for our specific tree ordinance in our development is that we can remove on this 4th column that's crossed out, we can remove heritage trees in a collector and they don't count against us. So the first table showed that, which it is better for Parkside on the River, but you don't have that. You don't, in the UDC code, they don't allow that. So if we didn't allow the collector trees to be removed, and we actually had to mitigate for that, you will see that now for phase 2-1 in the middle, we now have to plant 4,209 inches, and for 2-1, 2,214 inches. So you can see that there's a substantial amount of trees that have to be planted. And so we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we do that? And this is just for a heavily treed project with a lot of older mature trees. So what we found is that even if we plant, if you go over to the right, the far right, you can see, even if we plant the 1,020 trees on the 150 lots that's up at the top at phase 1A, so that's planting 2 3-inch trees for every lot and 4 3-inch trees on corner lots. Phase 1A has a surplus, so you actually end up with 383 inches as a surplus. If you go down to phase 2-1, the next one, that's 121 lots, and you can plant 822 inches. You still have a deficit of 3,387 inches. So what we look at for that is, with 3,387 inches, we don't have enough space in this project, even if we got credit for every tree we planted on on-site lots. And even if we got credit or get credit for every tree we plant on our common collector road. So when you come in, which we do anyways, when you come in on our boulevards, you've got trees and landscaping on either side and in the median. We plant all of that. We've got some ponds in this section, so we plant all around the detention ponds. And even if we plant all of that, on this section, we're still going to pay into the tree fund, because we will likely take advantage of the 30% allowed for the aeration of the heritage trees. But even if we do that, we still, on that section, because we have so many heritage trees, we will still be paying into the fund, even if we used all of the options. And then on the phase 2-2, we have a deficit of 1,788. That section doesn't hardly even have any collectors. So there's hardly any, it's 2 lots, it's basically all lots, and it doesn't even have any very few landscape areas. So basically we don't have any common areas to plant on that one. So we would take advantage of the heritage trees that you can, that are in the right of ways that you could make healthier. But basically on this one, we still would be paying into the tree fund. So just this case study shows you what a project looks like that's just really heavily treed. Obviously, it's very different when you have a project that doesn't have many trees, or has just, a moderate number of trees or smaller trees. But where our site is, we have a lot of trees. So, in the recommendations, I would say that we support A and E. And A is the 3-inch minimum size of the tree. We definitely support that. And E is, with the building permits. So, obviously the city has to have a way to verify that what the developer is saying or builder is saying is planted is actually planted. And you can really probably only do that through the building permit process. What we would not support is B, C, and D, which is the maximum 3 inches of credit per lot. And although this is a great start and a just great step in the right direction, you can see that still with the 3 inches of credit trees, it's nice, it provides some credit, but on a heavily treed project, you're still not there. It does a little bit for you. Same thing with C on the 30% of total mitigation. I don't see why there should be, honestly, I think B and C should be no limit. I think you should have no limit on that. And D, I agree with what Jordan was saying, is that, I think we should let those trees, any tree you plant count towards the landscape requirements. So, one of the things that we've learned, we have lots that are 45s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s in our projects. Kind of like what PJ said, if we had to do the 30-foot spacing on those small lots, we couldn't get those 2 trees in the front yard because we don't give them credit for backyard plantings. Obviously, it's only in the front yard. So on those smaller lots, it is harder to get those 2 trees in. That 30-foot spacing rule would not work. We do, in our deed restrictions, we require the 2 trees. And the only reason we give a variance is if that front yard already has a lot of existing trees in it and they just can't fit the new trees in there. So, and one thing and staff could verify this, but in our commercial tree landscape rules, I believe you get credit for any tree you plant. Even it counts towards the landscape requirement, even if it's in the shade tree requirement. So I don't understand why the difference would be between commercial and single family, why we couldn't give credit for that. But one thing that Philip brought up that I had brought up to Andrena, and we're 100% on the same page. I think that it should be written in the code that you have to satisfy the tree mitigation requirements first for the common area lots, because the whole point of the code and what Georgetown wants is to beautify when you go into your corridors and your ponds and your parks and your amenity centers. You want to see all the trees planted there. So I think it would be great if staff could find a way to write that to where you have to satisfy that first. And if you have any extra mitigation needed over and above that, then you can get credit for the on-site single family lots. But I certainly don't think that it should go where a developer or builder is trying to just get all their credit on single family lots and they're not planting in the common areas. We definitely don't support that. We're not going to change the way we plant on our projects either way. We're going to plant all of them in the common area lots like we always do, and we're going to plant on the single family lots. But again, I understand that staff has got to figure out a way to write this that across the board it works for everybody and it holds everybody accountable. So those are kind of just my general thoughts. Again, I appreciate everybody's hard work on this and just willingness to look into it, because it's certainly not easy to find a one size fits all for all these different types of projects, but that's how it impacts our project. So thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Those are really good comments. Anybody have a follow-up to that?
I have a question, Amy, just as you calculate this, I know you broke it down by a phase and section. Generally speaking, Parkside is a very large development and has some pretty big open green spaces. I mean, I think coming originally from the Water Oak design guidelines, are you saying that all of those large green spaces don't have enough room for a large number of the mitigation trees, or are we just focusing on the phases by themselves?
So the way the code is written right now is you look at it on a plat by plat basis. So it's not where we can look at the overall 3,000 lot development as a whole. And so like if you have a surplus or a deficit, and staff, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't like roll. Like say we have a surplus in the first section, that credit doesn't roll to the next section if you have a deficit. So when you look at that individual plat, you have to plant inside of that plat. And so if you have common areas in that plat, you've got ponds, you've got amenity centers, you have road right-of-ways, then you're going to plant as much as you can there, still with that spacing to keep your trees healthy. But some of the plats don't have ponds or amenity centers or parks, or many, they might have a small collector roadway into it, and you have a little area to plant, and that's all you have.
Okay, So since the large open spaces aren't being platted currently, you can't count mitigation in those areas, is
Well,
what I understand.
yes, and so like the difference in phase 1A, that's at Parkside Parkway, that's our large 4-lane roadway that goes into the main entrance of our subdivision. And so we can take up a lot of trees planted there. We can plant all along that boulevard quite a bit, which we'll be doing. We also have several ponds, and so we can plant all around those common areas. But once you get into, like, say down at the bottom, the phase 2.2 section, it's a little internal section. There's really no common areas to plant in that section.
Yeah, and so to kind of clarify that for you, Phil, yeah, if, we don't allow for the surplus current to transfer over from phase to phase. And then, yeah, you're kind of at the mercy of what's in your plat. If you have the open space, if you have the ponds, things like that. And I can't recall off the top of my head what each one of these phases had in them, Amy, but I don't believe any tree mitigation plans were submitted with them. So I'm not sure if you guys plan to do that later, like you mentioned with the boulevard, where you're going to plant in the like right away and medians where you can. But yeah, you're
I
correct.
think that's a separate process, Steve, for like our planting plan that will be submitted. I think there was like there might have been something general in the plans, but as far as all of our planting with our beds and our trees, that's something that will be submitted separately.
Yeah, so my comment kind of, because we're looking at this specifically, maybe that ought to be something. I'm not sure quite how to do it, because I understand the large open spaces aren't platted yet, so they're not common area yet from the city's perspective. However, if we look at it kind of like what I would call either a public improvement district or something like that. Not that we want to create anything like that, but maybe there's a way to allow either a bond for the fee in lieu that gets planted earlier and they get credit back for that, or something of that nature could be done for large developments like this. I understand you can't accept it quite yet because those aren't platted, so they're not common. But perhaps that could be one caveat, that the developer can get credit back if they plant the trees in a future open space or common lot phase
And
to address this overall issue.
Yeah, basically that's kind of what we will be doing. Because when we get our plan approval, typically you have to pay your tree mitigation fee at the time of plan approval. And then whatever we plant, and I think I've talked to other developers that are a part of this discussion. Basically, they do pay, and then you come back later and you can show the city what you planted, and then you get that money back. So I think that is in process, and that's great. One thing that I did forget to point out is that planting the tree is more expensive than paying the mitigation fee. So I know that Andreina said that there are some developers that really would just rather pay the fee because it's cheaper. And the reason that is because, when you're planting a tree, you're planting at a 3-to-1. So you have your mitigation times 3, and then you plant the tree. And I think the tree planting for like a 3-inch tree, depending on if it's in rock or dirt, is between $400 and $650. I think maybe on this presentation, I don't know if it was $350 or something like that, but and then paying the 1-to-1 is $200 an inch. So there are some developers that are going to just want to pay into the tree fund, and the city then can use that to beautify wherever. But for those developers that want to plant the trees, it's really on on a bigger picture on what you want your community to look like, you know, when you plant the trees, but really 10 years, 20 years from now, when you want to drive through and you have this community with all these large mature trees.
Yeah, so Amy and Phil, just to clarify on the ability to, plant the mitigation and then get reimbursed for it. So that doesn't actually happen. What generally happens is those tree mitigation plans are part of the submittal that comes in. That way, all of it is approved and agreed upon ahead of time. There has been only one instance that I know of where a developer agreed to plant and didn't have the plans right away, but were able to come to an agreement with the city that it would then be checked at the end for plantings like around their ponds and such. And then they went ahead and upfront paid and then were reimbursed once all of that was approved. But that's not common practice. So common practice is submitting the landscape plans either with the development or in some cases I have seen where an amendment comes back for landscaping and then we address it there. So.
So based on all the comments and the feedback that we have received, it appears that from what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, that I think everybody is good and we have consensus that A and E are definitely good to go. So what direction do we want to take for the remaining items? We've kind of like heard different things. Do we want to go? Do we want to go ahead and make a recommendation where we do limit the number of, whether it's the number of inches or the number of trees that may be planted on a property? Do we want to go ahead and actually cap a percentage of the amount of the resident trees that may be planted on the residential lots, whether they be in the street yard or whether they be in the rear yard or any other part of the property, depending on how big the lot may be or how small the lot may be? I think it's in terms of like requiring that trees be planted on common lot areas be the first. I think there's definitely an agreement to that, because as we were even talking about it with staff, that's one of the things that we said, that they should definitely be planting on those areas first. However, if not all subdivisions will include common areas. So by having a code requirement that says you have to plant it on common areas first, that requirement may not necessarily be applicable or may be feasible for a lot of subdivisions that do not have any common areas. So what are some of the terminologies that we may be able to include to be able to document and codify that? And what's that ratio? I mean, we've also heard that maybe you get a half credit for anything that goes above and beyond. So if you do count it towards meeting landscape requirements, is it at a full count? Is it at a half count? So what are some ideas?
I think the common area question is fairly simple. You just put if applicable or something like that. I mean, if, but the other ones, I'll leave it up to you guys to comment on that, but.
I have I don't know if it's a question or it's a thought, but it's about credit trees. We're talking about taking out large trees and replacing them with a whole bunch of little 3-inch trees. As the staff looked at the 18 to 25 credit tree that Amy talked about, and I know Hillwood also has, when you take out a big tree and you have to replace it with something little, it feels like maybe we're missing that middle area where we could get some credit for 20-inch trees.
Yeah.
I know when I've been involved in these, you focus everything on a large 30-inch tree and you forget about like 8, 16 to 20-inch trees that are right next to it. You move your road over there and you take all those other nice trees out. I just wonder if credit could be an option here.
Yeah, that's the 18 to 25 range only generally comes up when a developer seeks a PUD. or a development agreement of some kind. So it's, you know, it's just not, we just don't allow for protected in general across the board to account for any mitigation credit towards heritage trees. So
No, I know what the regulation is. I'm saying we talked an hour ago about dropping down to a 3-inch credit tree for commercial properties. So I'm wondering,
We have had,
can we consider credit trees for residential?
we have talked about it. And there were a few pros and a few cons, right? Of course, pro, you do save a really nice tree, right? And you get a neighborhood with, you know, mature trees rather than a neighborhood with twigs. And I was real gung ho about this. You can ask Steve. We've disagreed about it. It was brought up by urban forester that she sees a lot of times where tree protection is not installed during construction, and you end up somebody with a backhoe taking out a chunk of the chunk of a tree, or, you know, placing heavy equipment around them. So of course, it requires another level of kind of supervision and maintenance there. The other issue that was brought up was that, you know, you typically have more protected trees than you do heritage trees. And so if you did consider a credit tree option, you could actually be de-incentivizing, you know, heritage trees in a way, you know, if you get, depending on how much credit you could get for the tree. So we've definitely talked about it.
Personally, I'd going back on something that Amy said. I do like the idea, just as you do in a commercial site development plan table, of getting some credit for both. I would support a limit, maybe even a smaller limit on the on-site replacement, but I feel like I want to support having that count towards landscape requirements as well. It feels like C and D go together. It either, if we don't count it towards landscape, then I'd support that 30% going up. But it feels like they need to be tied together in my mind.
Does everybody generally agree with that? Sorry, Philip, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, that's good. That's fine. I don't know that I completely agree with that, just because I think, you know, each lot is required. So we're talking about mitigation trees. And so that's typically, you know, above and beyond some requirements. And so in this case, you know, they're required to put 1 tree in per the 50-foot calculation, all that stuff. And so if they add 2 trees, then you can get some credit for that one as mitigation. I'm kind of in favor of that personally. I still believe I could easily get rid of C, but count all the mitigation, additional landscape requirements at a 50% ratio. Again, back to my point that if you don't have control of those trees, which was a big issue with city staff, how do you control that? Well, then let's just buttress the numbers enough to make sure that you have a 50% survival and you pretty much meet the requirements. So that's my comments based on everything I've heard.
Any other thoughts from any other member from our UDC? Advisory committee? Okay, so so in terms of direction for staff, for us to go and draft an ordinance language, on particularly, so it sounds like B should probably go away. Is that what I've heard? And kind of like find a way that some middle ground between C and D. This is great. This is wonderful feedback, guys.
I agree in some respects. I think a lot of, B can probably go away just
Okay,
because of that. So then the big question is, yeah, it comes down to C and D, figuring out what's the right way to do that.
okay. And so what I'm hearing, and so if I've heard correctly, what we're thinking is that, okay, if we do not use them to be able to count towards meeting landscaping requirements, because we're just talking about mitigation, they should still have to be required to plant the minimum 1 tree for every 50 linear feet, then the percentage towards counting total mitigation, that should somehow go up. Is that correct?
I think generally, that's what I'm hearing. I agree with you that that's kind of the feedback that we're
But
hearing
Philip,
here.
but
is
you're
that-
saying we should kind of like do something like the other way?
Yeah, I still think there's a recommendation. Don't limit the amount of mitigation. Again, okay, I don't want to get ahead of myself. First, plant in common areas, I think that's kind of a given and agreement we talked to about.
Yep.
Then when it comes to either a limit on how much of the mitigation can end up on residential lots is up in question. And my recommendation is do a 50% ratio of inches planted to credit so that you have more trees than you need to survive to meet that mitigation requirement. So every 2 trees that are planted, you get credit for 1 tree as mitigation.
Okay. Okay. And then that somehow, will definitely allow you to be able to count some for landscaping requirements, but but half of it count towards mitigation.
I think personally, I believe that 1 tree for landscape requirements should be required. The second tree gets 50% credit as a mitigation tree. That's
Okay.
I like where you're going there, Philip.
Yeah, I think it sounds
I
reasonable.
can support that.
Okay. So do we have, I can't see everybody, but do we generally have consensus agreement on that?
It's Brian Robinson, yes.
Yes, for me.
Yes, for me.
Okay. I know we're not voting, but just kind of want to have an idea, like at least know what direction to take here with the wording language. Okay. Steve, Ethan, are we good on this? Do we need any other direction, feedback?
Steve and Ethan, can I ask, take one of those project examples that we saw today, and when you draft up this ordinance, if we could see how it might apply and change the numbers on just one of them. I'd be curious to see how the numbers changed.
Yeah, we can do that. The only thing I guess I kind of would like to get some feedback on would be the spacing requirement. If we're going to go ahead and move to the 50% ratio with, the 2 trees end up counting as 1, what is the recommended spacing in the eyes of the committee? So
I would be in favor of a smaller one in what's standard on lots, which I would say is roughly 15 feet.
okay, so then 15-foot requirements on center would also apply to that. Yeah, there you go.
That makes sense to me.
Amy, do you have a question? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. I agree with what Philip was saying. I just was gonna say if he didn't, just to put a minimum in there. Certainly if you have a larger lot, you're gonna want to plant your trees further apart, but just on those smaller lots, just have like a minimum 15 foot or something in there.
I agree.
Yeah,
It's a minimum.
that'd be good.
What else?
Okay.
All
Well,
right,
I think that it's actually, I think I think this is it. This is on this particular item. So definitely appreciate the feedback. Appreciate the discussion. Thank you for working with us and sharing your thoughts and recommendations. As Ethan mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, what we're going to do is that we're now going to finalize these terms into actually code language that we're going to be bringing to you at the next UDC meeting in June, for you to actually vote on it and make a recommendation to both the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council for them to take action in June and July, and hopefully have this ordinance along with all the amendments that we've been working since the beginning of summer of last year, amended and finalized and incorporated into our UDC. So it's been a long road, but definitely appreciate all the feedback and the input on these amendments. Other than that, I think we should be, what we're going to do, since we're going to be bringing it to you in June, is that we're going to be posting the red lines sometime either in the next couple of weeks, so that that way they're also available to the public and everybody can read the red lines. And if we do receive any feedback and comments, to make sure that we bring those to you in June for your consideration. And that's it. That's the end of this particular item.
Well, on that, I do want to ask, last round of public comment we did, we, had a website set up, we had office hours posted, sent it out to our typical email list of developers and applicants. Even went and talked to, Development Alliance with the Chamber of Commerce. So any recommendations beyond those, beyond our kind of our standard folks we reach out to? If think some, shoot us an email.
all right, thank you. Yeah, I think we're doing good. Amy's done a good job getting the word out to the development community. I appreciate that very much. And we, Amy, again, we appreciate all the hard work you've done to help enlighten us on some of the actual numbers of what this stuff looks like. So I appreciate that. But very much appreciate the staff's working on this. I think the tree mitigation and landscaping issue has probably taken almost as long as writing the entire UDC the first time. So it's been quite a deal, I have to admit, but it's important. It really is, and I appreciate the effort everybody's been putting into it. It's every survey we see about this city, that one of the top things is talking about is the beautification and why do people move here? It's because it's a beautiful town. It's got charm. Well, trees are probably 90% of that when you think about it, because it's what makes it so beautiful around here, and people don't want to see a big parking lot with a bunch of rooftops. So we appreciate the developers who appreciate that as well, and they help drive that, and we just want to make sure it's fair to both sides. So that's what we're here for. So last thing I want to say is this is our last meeting with ADQ. We're not going to get to see you anymore. She's moving on to bigger and better things, and we're going to miss you terribly. Thank you. Can't thank you enough for all the hard work I know you do behind the scenes of this. And I know Georgetown and their staff is going to miss you greatly. And that's what Georgetown's losing, Cedar Park's gaining. So good for them. But thank you so much. Appreciate it. We're going to miss you, and stay in touch.
No, absolutely. I'm going to miss you all. Very, very much so. Don't tell anybody else, but I think you're actually my favorite board commission. So no, we've done a lot of great work together. And it's been a long road, but it's been a really good one, good experiences. We've done some really great things for all of us to be proud of. And so I truly enjoyed working with all of you. Philip, I'm still waiting on those brownies, but no worries, no rush. But no, I do hope that our paths cross again, and I'll still be around. So definitely stay in touch, and I'm here for whatever you may need. So.
All right. Well, thank y'all so much again for your time, everybody on the committee. I appreciate it very much. We'll look forward to the comments that come back and the red lines, and we'll hopefully knock this thing out next month. So
Thank y'all very much for letting me be involved. I really appreciate it.
you're welcome, Amy.
Thank you.
All right, well, y'all have a good evening. With that, I'll declare the meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you.